Right. Well, we're getting along very nicely, I think, with Who Determines the View.
I'll give you a shout.
We've had some interesting talks up to now, and I'm sure that John, I said the farmers are the Linch Pins because they are the ones who are managing most of the land. John Bell of Valence Lodge, I think there've been bells at Valence Lodge for a long time. I seem to remember that when I very first came up into Teesdale, that there were bells there, and I believe they were breeders of nail ponies at that time. But things have moved on since then. Tractors don't breed themselves. I'm afraid they're expensive replacements. However, John, I'm very pleased to introduce you to all of us as a goodly number, and I'm looking forward, I'm sure they are, to hearing what you've got to say about farming in the Upper Dale, in the upper part of the Penhunters. So, are you ready, John?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, you can hear me. Right, would you like to start then?
Right, well, just to touch on what Margaret said, yeah, my family's been here for just over 100 years. My mother was born here. But it's not something I brag about because I have a neighbour whose family has been on their farm for 500 years. I can't believe it's been 20 years since I was last asked to speak to you. It feels more like 10. I'm not really comfortable with this format, so fingers crossed that things go all right. If we'd been in a meeting in a room, I would have liked to have asked you how you think farming has changed. I would have found your perspective and answers very interesting. I'm going to widen my brief as I feel I need to go back more than 20 years to give a clear picture. And anything I tell you will be in good faith and as accurate as my memory allows. But please feel free to question anything I say. A pivotal year was, I believe, 1985. A horrendously wet summer saw the arrival of the first round baler belonging to John Collins, who was a newcomer to the Dale. The ground was so wet that he had to borrow the only four-wheel drive tractor in the Dale from Alan Scott, who then farmed Intake and Widdy Bank. Every farm now has a four-wheel drive tractor. That's one thing that's changed. A number of meadows were left uncut that year because of the ground conditions. Also arriving that year was the first major environmental scheme, the ESA. It came at just the right time. The reason I say this is that prior to 1985, it was the norm for farmers to apply 100 weight of fertiliser to the acre. And this had been the case at Valence Lodge since the 1950s. Farmers were reluctant to apply more than this, as a heavy crop was difficult to make into good hay in the short bursts of fine weather that we get if we are lucky. The round baler allows you to make good haylage in 2 days, half the time it takes to make hay. There is no doubt in my mind that if the ESA had not restricted farmers to 100 weight to the acre, fertiliser usage would have gone up significantly to the detriment of plant diversification. So most of the meadows were farmed as before. I've lost you, Margaret. Hello. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And Margaret is still there. She's just been very
All right,
quiet.
right. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'll carry on.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, so most of the meadows were farmed as before, although some took advantage of a higher meadow payment in return for not applying any fertilizer. This was a big mistake. A lack of nutrients is an open door for rush infestation. This can be seen in the 2 roadside meadows, a quarter of a mile up the road from Landenbeck Hotel. These meadows have had no fertilizer since 1985. In my opinion, these fields are no longer meadows, as they do not produce fodder that stock will eat or thrive on. I'm going to try this. I've got some photographs here. I'll hold up and hopefully, yeah, it looks like you can sort of see them. So that's a photograph of one of the meadows I'm talking about. As you can see, there's a lot of brown rush throughout it. I'll show you 1 or 2 more. This is another meadow. This is further up the dale. This is in Harwood in Teesdale. As you can see, all the dark patches are rushes. This is one on the backside of the plantation. If you come down Cow Green Road, you can see this one. Again, you can see the rushes. The same field, John Collins did cut some of it that year and try to make into hay or silage, but obviously it was mainly rushes. It just ended up being bedded. I hope could you see those okay?
Yeah, we can. We get the general impression, thanks, John. Yes.
Right. Yeah. However, these meadows were in the minority, and most continued to get the modest application of 100 weight to the acre. 2010 saw the arrival of the entry-level and high-level stewardship, which we were told were going to be a big improvement. I don't think it was really. I can safely say that each new scheme is worse in many ways than the one it replaces, and this is going to apply to the elms, which has been under development for 4 years and may be ready in another 4. English Nature was now Natural England. The name hadn't changed much, neither had the organisation. To be fair, a lot of work had gone into the HLS. The prescription manuals add up to over 250 pages. However, for hill farmers, some of the prescriptions were counterproductive. For example, our SSSI meadows were no longer allowed their 100 weight of fertilizer, which they had enjoyed for the previous 60 years. A couple of years earlier, seed had been collected from one of our meadows because it was particularly species rich. So why change the management that was obviously working? A meadow survey carried out by 9 farmers in the Upper Dale clearly demonstrated that the ones most prone to rushes were the ones which had not had fertilizer. I appreciate that fertilizer is a dirty word within Natural England, and I admit that too much would have a negative effect on species-rich meadows. But you can't continually remove hay crops without replacing the nutrients. For several years now, Natural England have been conducting field trials with rush plots in both meadows and pastures, but as yet I have not seen any results. Maybe Margaret has. In my opinion, there was already ample evidence on the ground. 2 more prescriptions stand out as being hard to live with. Firstly, not being allowed to supplementary feed in some fields. Supplementary feed in some fields essentially meant that they could not be used in winter months, which in turn leads to overstocking in the fields where feeding is allowed. Secondly, not being able to spread muck after April the 1st was a real setback. Some springs, the ground is just too wet to allow spreading before this date. The rule was set in place to protect nesting birds. But the truth is that lapwings rely on the muck on the ground to camouflage their nest sites from the gulls. And if muck hasn't been spread, they will move over to pastures where there is some cover. Thankfully, there has been some give on this. And subject to the farmer surveying his fields, we are now able to spread after this date. In the last 25 years, there's been large deductions in the number of fell sheep under the direction of Natural England. Valence Lodge has been reduced from 1,450 to 800. Neighbouring fells have seen similar, if not bigger, reductions. Woody Bank went from 600 down to 200 and has since been increased. All these fells on Raby estates were stinted, a stint being the right to graze a sheep. Each farm was allowed so many stints, the number being arrived at by shepherds who had spent their lives on the fells and knew how many sheep they could carry without being overgrazed. The fells now, in my opinion, are undergrazed. And as a result, nutrient levels have fallen. And we see an increase in rush cover and bog asphodel. If there is not the sheep on the ground in early spring to graze it, the yellow flowers that follow prove deadly to lambs. I'll show you some more photographs at this point. That's a photograph of bog asphodel in an allotment above Ashkill Head, up Harwood. There's another one here, and if you can see the fence line, inside the fence where you see all the bog asphodel, it had been ungrazed for a number of years. It is allowed some very light grazing now, but the difference in the fence line is between where it's been undergrazed and where it's been grazed more normally. I think that proves fairly conclusively that it's a problem that comes when it is undergrazed. This photograph is looking across Widdybank Fell. And again, I mean, this is a little bit later in the season and the flowers have turned orange, but you can see how widespread it is. The reason it's one of my pet hates is because of what it does to lambs that eat it. This is probably the worst case I've seen. And after taking these photographs, I put the lamb down because it days earlier it had stopped eating and it was in too bad a state to hope for recovery. Bog asphodel, it's not unlike ragwort, but it's not down as one of the, I think that on the weeds list, there's 4 sort of weeds that you're supposed to really take seriously. Ragwort being one, and there's a couple of dockings. I can't think what the last one is. But by all intents and purposes, the only reason why bog asphodel isn't on the list is that when the list was drawn up, it wasn't a problem. It's something that's really come to light in recent years, and it seems to have come hand in hand with the reduction of sheep on the fells. It's called bog asphodel, but believe me, it can grow anywhere. I've seen it halfway up Ben Nevis, where it's grown on barely an inch of soil on top of rock. So it's like most weeds, it's a real survivor. And ragwort is similar in that if there's stock in the field in early spring and it's grazed off, it doesn't come to flower. So it's something that can only be controlled by grazing. One of the annoying things is that it's classed by Natural England as being a positive indicator species. Like Birkdale Fells and Widdybank are now, there's an abundance of it. And it's where there's been large sheep reductions. I realise what I've said so far all feels very, very negative. I'll try and lighten it up a bit. If I was to ask you the best bit of tech in recent years, you would say the mobile phone. I would say the quad bike. And from a farmer's point of view, from a hill farmer's point of view, it's invaluable. The time it saves when shepherding and lambing is unbelievable, and it allows one man to do what would have been done by 3 or 4 or 5 in the past. To continue being upbeat, we're currently enjoying really good stock prices, but this comes on the back of them being more or less stagnant for decades. Costs, however, are shooting up. Machinery, animal feed, diesel have all seen significant rises in the last year. And the free trade agreements recently announced puts our stock prices at risk. We don't really know how that's going to pan out. I think I must have been talking too quickly because I've got through this far faster than I intended, but hopefully it'll leave more time for questions. Our paperwork has increased beyond belief in recent years. I mean, this would be something that my grandparents wouldn't be faced with at all. Now, when a calf is born, we have to apply for a passport within 3 weeks, and that passport stays with it during its lifetime. All livestock obviously now need movement forms before they go to market. We have to move them under license. And as a throwback to foot and mouth, if we take any livestock onto the farm, then we come under a 6-day standstill. As for the paperwork and recording involved in being farm assured, well, that's too big a topic to get into at all. Right, I hope you have found this interesting, if not very professional, and hopefully I've left plenty of time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Margaret, do you want to kick off with questions?
Thank you very much, John. I'll ask Tricia if she'll field any questions from other people.
Can people? I'm not quite sure. I'll put that on. If people can wave their hands or put themselves off mute or put their questions in chat, then I'll try and field them on to John. I've got Bridget Black, thank you, very informative. Does anybody actually have, Steve, would you like to speak? Steve gone? I'm trying to actually sort of man chat and
I'll have a word. Trish,
go for it.
John, you said you're not professional. You're highly professional. You're the farmer doing the great stuff in Upper Teesdale. So that was an excellent presentation. And essentially, we being the non-farming members of the non-farming community need your expertise. We need to hear what you experience, good and bad, and we need more and more for actions to be taken to support you. So well done. Thank you from all of us, I think, and that was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the comment.
Jeff, if you'd like to unmute and make a comment.
John, I was wondering what your view is the correct number of sheep to have on Widdybank Fell.
Oh, well, I wouldn't actually know, but bearing in mind, I'm pretty right in saying the original number was 600 and it was dropped to 200. I would say that closer, that 600 is probably in about where it should be. I think it's probably about 400 now, so it's probably come up about halfway house. But obviously, while it was reduced to 200, that's given the Bog Asphodel chance to really get away. But I'm pretty confident that the original numbers were fairly well thought out. They were probably set in the 1800s. And in those days, the farmers spent their lives on the fell. I mean, we go onto the fell, obviously to gather sheep and to move sheep about if we need to. We go on the fell if it's going to be bad weather. That's something that has improved, which I didn't mention in recent years, is the weather forecasting. So whereas in the past, farmers would get caught with bad snowstorms, at least now we have pre-warning and we were able to get out there and move sheep onto relatively safe ground. The reason I say one of the problems now with the stocking on the fell is our fell's different to a lot. Ours and Richard Betton's, in that we were allowed to graze our sheep out all through the winter, whereas the shared fell on Harwood Fell, they had to be removed by a certain date. I think it was in February originally, and then it got moved back to March. The problem is now that farmers don't bother putting them back to the fell at all in the spring, because they don't want to put them back to the fell just prior to lambing and for them to lose condition. So they tend to be kept on inside land and fed, often with bought-in fodder, until the lamb. Because they're kept on inside land and kept in good condition, they have far more twins than they used to have. And so the farmers tend to put the hogs back to the fell and the yows with single lambs back to the fell. But a lot of the flock never go back to the fell. So the fells have been hit by a double whammy. Already the numbers have been greatly reduced by National England's policy. And then because of the way the farmers farm, there's less sheep go back to the fell. And there's areas of, say, Harwood Fell that I help neighbours gather up from Cowgreen Reservoir, where now it's just a mass of wet vegetation. It's grossly undergrazed. Like it's to such an extent that it's dead ground. There's no birds can raise chicks in there because the vegetation is so deep and so wet that any chick spawn would just die of starvation. They couldn't get out into the sun. So yeah, in answer to your question, I would say they've certainly done right putting it back up to 400 if that's where the number is now. And hopefully they'll assess the situation and change the number in years to come. But we, or rather I, can never agree with National England as to what is undergrazing and what is overgrazing. Their opinion of overgrazing is different to mine. And to add to it further, something I don't think they take into account is that when they take the sheep off the fell, they're not just taking the grazing away, but the sheep obviously are there producing manure. So the nutrient levels are falling on the fell all the time. The beauty about having the sheep on the fell during the winter months is they're eating rough vegetation then that they wouldn't even look at during the summer. And so if they're not on over the winter months, that rough vegetation, you know, it has no control. So the fells just get rougher and rougher. So in my opinion, and you struggle to find a farmer, I think, who'll pay to argue with me, that the fells have deteriorated, without a doubt, including our own. It is still grazed over the winter, but to enter into the last, we've just entered into a stewardship scheme in this last year, and now for the first time we've had to off-winter 200 sheep. So on half of our fell, the sheep numbers dropped significantly, and I just hope that it doesn't result in bog asphodel being a problem.
Right. Thanks for that. Very interesting, John. Thanks.
Cheers. Mike, did you have a question? Yeah, Joanna, I've spotted you. You're on mute.
Yeah. Oh yeah, hello, John.
Yeah, are you still available for leading bales, Mike? It's a bit since you've done any.
For doing what?
Are you still available for leading bales?
well, I wouldn't say no. Oh, if you can get, if you can get Richard to go up as well, I'll be there.
Right. Okay.
Right. I think that last time we bumped into each other, we were teaching in my son Clive how to fire a gun on your land, weren't we? So
right.
You might have forgotten that, but anyhow, what my question was were all the examples of the bog asphodel that you showed us pictures of, were they all down to the policies of Natural England, or were you showing us some land that had just been, for some reason, not farmed?
Well, no, I showed you a picture. I had two pictures actually of Woody Bank. That was where sheep reduction, there'd been significant sheep reductions from 600 down to 200. Yeah, the first one I showed you, it was on land on the road to Walston below where Paul Johnson farms, and again that was one where it had Morris Toward farmed there years ago, and for a number of years it had no sheep, no stock on at all. Actually, prior to it having no stock on, that a small blackcock lek established there. You might know that the main blackcock lek is on an allotment on our farm as you go over to St. John's Chapel on the right-hand side. Well, they had a small blackcock lek broken off and established itself in that allotment where the bog asphodel is. And I think it was at that time when took the stock off altogether. Well, within 3 years, the blackcock lek had disappeared. As I mentioned before, this was a case of being so much vegetation that chicks just couldn't survive, and it became dead land as far as birds were concerned. So yeah, I mean, I have other photographs, and they are all of areas. There's one down from Westland Chapel. There's a quarry there. You look across towards the quarry below Westland Chapel, and if you look at that, there's bog asphodel on there. There's also a lot of thistles and dockins, and that's what rewilding looks like.
What?
Just concentrate.
I can't manage. I can't bin the noise.
Of course you can. It's not right.
Sorry, John, do you want to continue? That's
Sorry?
the interruption. We had a pleasant interruption there.
All right.
Do you want to continue, or shall I get Joanna to ask a question?
No, carry on. Yeah.
Joanna,
Yeah.
you had a question.
Thank you. I'm just continuing this debate about bog asphodel, because I remember years ago, I think when this new scheme started, and up at the Wilsons up at Arngill, I mean, they were really getting upset about the number of lambs that were dying because of it. It would be helpful to some of us who are not farmers if you could explain how this poison, basically they must be getting poisoned, but if you could explain how it happens. That's one question. And the other question I have is about both about bog asphodel and about the rushes. What has been done about what is being done seriously to cut back, so to stop these plants invading everything? I have to say, it grieves me dreadfully to see fields and hay meadows being taken over by the rushes, which are no good to anybody, or very little. And surely we ought to be trying to do something more about it. And surely Natural England would be interested in working with us to do that.
Well, you'd have thought so. To do your Rush's point first, actually, in the I mentioned that under the high level and entry level scheme, there was a 250-page manual, which there is. And under their prescription for meadows, it actually states, it lists the plants they would hope to see in the meadows after 4 years. And it actually says that rushes is one of the plants that they want to see. So there's never been, but there's never been any real worry from their part about rushes being in the meadows. That's how I take it. They don't seem driven to do anything really about it. Now, one of the problems is with controlling rushes. I mean, it pastures as well, but meadows is where I saw the real problem. But actually, we've had a couple of really dry springs up here, and it's really knocked the rushes back. So there's no doubt that climate has a lot to do with it. And as I say, it has improved. Certainly in our meadows, there was starting to get to be a problem, and it's certainly improved in the last couple of years. The trouble is with, I think it's, Mark will know better than me, I think it's the jointed rush is the sparse that we see in the meadows. And they're very hard to control. The only thing you can really control them with is MCPA. Now, unfortunately, MCPA was just designed to be used through a sprayer. And because of that, we aren't allowed, or Natural England won't allow us to use it through a weed wipe, which is what we would use to control rushes with, because it's obviously you can target just that plant because it's higher than the rest. So we would be able to control it using a weed wipe if we could use MCPA. Like Roundup just doesn't seem to touch it at all. Now, the soft rush, which you get in the pastures, the big clumpy rush, that is controlled by Roundup. So I don't see that as being a bigger problem. If you're getting too much of that, then you can sort of control it using a weed wipe Roundup. Going back to your bog asphodel, going back a few years when I was really looking into this, I sort of knew it chapter and verse, but I don't now. But what it does is it attacks the liver of the animal, and it makes it very sensitive to light. So it's actually the sunshine that does it, which you'd think up here wouldn't be too big a problem, would you? But yeah, that's the problem. It affects I think it's the kidneys and possibly the liver as well. Now we don't know how big a problem it is, because we see quite a few where the first signs that you see is where the ears are affected and a little bit scabby. But often you get lambs like that are no worse. The photograph I showed you where it had massive lesions down its back, that's worst case scenario. But we don't know how many lambs are affected without showing those signs and turning out to be lambs that don't thrive and in the end don't make you a profit. So we have no idea of what it really costs us in financial terms. We just know it is a problem. And as it was mentioned before, like in this area, I think Martin Wilson has the biggest problems up Loondale, and I think he has he has allotments that are fenced off and he keeps stock out during the spring. But that means you've given up to it, really.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Am I missing anybody? Is
Yeah.
anybody waving? Sorry, Nicola.
Yeah, Nikki. Hi.
Sorry.
It was just, it's okay. John, talking about the change in the last 20 years, and I just don't know this area well enough, and apologies. Has there been an impact about lack of abattoirs affecting you and things? Because a lot of rural areas have been affected by that when you look back over the 20 years.
Yeah, well, yes and no. We used our closest abattoir was over at near St. John's Chapel, down at Westgate. That closed. Then it was Joe Simpson's down at Cockfield. Yeah, that closed. We still do tend to take a few lambs of our own for our own consumption and for one or two friends. And I think my son takes it to somewhere down near Hawes now. So we have to travel a lot further. But yeah, it's only one trip, well, 2 trips, taking them there and picking them up. So not massively, no.
Essentially. And then the other question is, there's a lot of talk about carbon capture and the, keeping our soils and all of that, and tree cover and shrub cover. What do you see as the opportunities that are balanced with farming in your area?
Well, it's a difficult one. It's a grey area. In terms of what payments might be received for carbon and that, it's still not known whether they'll go to the tenant or the landlord. So that's still a big question mark. Currently on our farm, this is through our current stewardship scheme. There's a lot of work going on the top of our fell. This is, as you go over the road to St. John's Chapel over on the right-hand side, there's diggers there where there's big peat blocks, sort of reprofiling the ground. They've flown in, I think, about 3,000 dumpy bags of brash to be spread on the bare peat, and they're going to be planting sphagnum mosses and this sort of thing to try and, which is all admirable. I have my doubts as to whether it'll work as well up there as on some sites, just because of the amount of rainfall we get. One of the worries I have is where there's gullies and that, they're making dams. This is with the flown stone in. They've also produced some rolls out of wool, which actually gave wool a value, which is a new thing. For them to peg down in the gullies to stop the water flow. I'm not sure about that, because as it stands now, a lot of these gullies are down to the clay. Now, by putting the dams in, they're going to fill up with sediment. That's the plan. But the trouble with that is that now, if you get really heavy levels of rainfall and floods, it's going to be running over this sediment instead of running over clay. So I think you might actually get more sediment going down the river than what we're currently getting. But I don't know, time will tell on that.
Thank you.
Ruth?
Yeah,
Ruth, yes.
John, can you explain a bit more about elms, please? And what are your feelings about this new scheme?
I can't. I can't. The reason being that there's not much information out there. It's sort of, although it's been worked on for 4 years, it's still sort of pie in the sky. My feeling is that it's more leaning towards the environment, and I feel that there's a balance to be struck between farming requirements and environmental requirements. But yeah, it's difficult to work out just where it's going to be. It doesn't seem to be meeting the criteria as far as farmers are concerned. And yeah, I don't hold out much hope for it.
When is it due to start?
Well, they don't even know that.
Oh,
Initially, it was going to be 2024. I think it's been put down back to 2026. And what's currently happening, most people's HLS schemes are just being rolled over year on year. But some people, as we have, well, our rollover was not offered to us. So some people are going into like a new stewardship scheme. But yeah, I don't know. But I am confident that it won't be as good as what's gone before. It never is. They tend to, instead of taking the best out of the schemes that they have and improving on them, they tend to chuck the old scheme out and start afresh. And every time they get worse at it. That's how my opinion.
thank you.
Have we got any more questions out there? Somebody,
Yeah,
if you've
but-
got a question, shout up. I can't see any more hands. Is anybody waving at me?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sorry, Simon, yes, thank you.
Thanks, John, for that. That's really very useful to hear that. And I'm not I don't know hardly anything about farming really, or botany, to be honest. I come to a group like this to try and get some sort of understanding. I'm sort of want to follow up on the agro-environmental schemes and perhaps what might be best going in the future, because there seems to have been over time this real disagreement or dissatisfaction on all sides in terms of how our landscapes are protected and how species are encouraged, those that are rare and endangered, etc. So there seems to be a bit of a conflict. And I know from having met people in natural England that they're not malicious or got malintentions. They're trying to do their best they can within the structures that they have to operate in. And Richard Bettman certainly convinced me more than a decade or two ago that instead of perhaps prescriptions always being offered, but management by results is perhaps a better way to try and structure these sort of agro-environmental schemes. But I just wanted to sort of see how do you see some of these conflicts that have been around for a while? How do you see them being best resolved? Because it seems to me that in some areas there'll be, you're not going to make everybody happy. And in some cases, the farmers are going to perhaps not be as happy as somebody who wants to protect birds or see more sphagnum moths or whatever it might be in a particular area. So I just wanted to see what you felt was sort of the practical way from your experience with having to deal with these government schemes might be the better approach to try and sort of at least come to some improvement of what everybody wants to see without, and retaining our farming communities in the Upper Dale at the same time.
Right, well, to touch on what you said, what Richard Bettman had said, to look at it in terms of by results. Yeah, I'm not as sure about that as Richard is. I'm not as dead against prescriptions as Richard is. My big problem was that the prescriptions weren't designed with the help of farmers or the input of farmers, or didn't appear to be. There was some of them which, well, I went through some of them tonight, which was so basically wrong that if there had been any farmer input, it hadn't been listened to. The problem with payment by results is there's so much that is out of the farmer's control in terms of weather conditions from year to year. They can vary so much and they have such a big impact. And measuring, like the Game Conservancy, I'll give you an example. The Game Conservancy do a bird count here of the blackcock every year, and they send us the results. And like I always know roughly to within 2 or 3 the number of blackcock that are on our farm, because I see them fairly regularly, obviously. And they can come back with a count, and I've nothing against them. Like I know Phil Warren from the Game Conservancy well, and everything is done in good faith. But they'll do a count and they'll come back with maybe 7 cocks and 4 hens, and there's 2 hens reared chicks and this. And I might know for a fact that there's 17 cocks kicking about and 23 hens. And you know, the bird count is nowhere near what it is. So if you were getting measured by results, and that was as accurate as the results would be, then you'd be in dire trouble, wouldn't you? Yeah. So where's it going in the future? I really don't know. We are trying, as farmers, we are trying to hold our ground. We still think it's necessary that, and I think that food should be seen as being worth having, you know, as being a public good. It's got to be just as big a public good as looking after the diversity of plants. And to be fair, it annoys me when I go down country and see good land, good productive land being put down to trees, as if there's a surplus in the world of food. We're in a world now where climate change means that you can't guarantee production from any one place in the world. So why we're putting good land down to trees is beyond me. I can see a reason for doing some tree planting further up the dales where land isn't as productive. But yeah, I don't know where it's going.
Martin has a question.
Well, it was really an observation because I photographed your lek, you know, with a permit from Raby, and last year the numbers were absolutely extraordinary. I don't see the results of the census that they do each year, but I'm astonished. I've been going up there every year since, I don't know how many years I've gone there for now, but I've never seen figures as low as the ones you just quoted. And last year was last year was the first time when I've seen almost exactly the number that you said, which was 17 odd cock and 20 odd hens at the same time. I only wish from a photographer's point of view that the hens were a little more impressed by what the cocks get up to, because they just seem to mooch around and
yeah,
you know, think, oh, is that the best you can do again? You know, I live in hopes of some real action photos, but never seem to get them.
Us males are never appreciated.
No, I know, shocking.
Nice try, the pair of you. Margaret?
John, this question is going back to what we were talking about of the bog asphodel. We've just had 2 very dry springs. Lasting far too long as dry weather's concerned. I noticed in a small, only a small area of Willymount Fell, but an area I know fairly well, and it seemed to me that last year the bog asphodel really wasn't doing very well and didn't produce many flowers. Have you been finding the same situation?
Yeah, well, it was probably about 6 or 8 years ago when I took these photographs, and I don't know why, it must be a climate thing, but I've never seen bog asphodel in that sort of quantity ever since. It seemed in that year, it really took off for some reason. We have bog asphodel in the allotment where the blackcock lek is. It's there all the time, but not to see big clumps like that. There's odd ones here and there, all, you know, over quite a big area. But not to be, you can't see it as being yellow like that unless you're close up to it. So why that should be, I don't know. But that particular year, it seemed to take off out of all proportion. I mean, to be fair, it was a little bit similar with thistles this year. Like on the fells, there was thistles like I've never seen them before. So again, it must just be down to climate.
You mentioned thistles there. Was that a creeping thistle? Do you know?
No, these thistles, we should have had a class for them at Landbeck Shore, because a lot of them were 6 foot tall and some of them would be taller than that. It was like, there was areas where there was like a forest of thistles.
Did they have darkish red flower heads?
Yes.
Yes, sounds like a marsh thistle. And that is, that's a biennial plant. After flowering, it can die. And I mentioned that when you saw all of those, you've got a lot of tall, dead stems now.
Yeah.
But if those plants would flower and seed, if you've got even small bare patches amongst the pasture there, that makes a good place for seedlings to establish. And so when you're up on that part of the allotment, you might find that you've got a lot of rosettes of thistles that will be the first year, and then they will flower in their second year. But a reason for getting too many little pockets of open ground in which the thistles can grow is overgrazing. And I wonder if the grassland has been overgrazed over a number of years, particularly, you know, we've had these dry periods and you've got to put your sheep and lambs out somewhere. And if there is a lot for them to eat, then it does create open spaces. It's a bit of an awkward thing, isn't it? Bit of a chicken and egg.
Yeah, well, the problem on a fell like ours at Valence Lodge is it's so varied. It goes up to over 2,000 feet in some places and drops to about 1,100, 1,200 in other places. And the vegetation varies greatly. So there isn't a correct number of sheep to put on it in terms of the correct grazing pattern, because no matter how far you cut the sheep numbers, they'll always tend to graze, obviously, the sweet ground. They'll graze the grass on top of the limestone. So you could make an argument on some areas of the fell that it's overgrazed, which I couldn't argue with, because of the nature of the ground. They go down to it because it's sweeter. So you could cut the number, well, I have cut the number more or less by a half, but there'll certain areas of the fell always be overgrazed, just as there's certain areas that are always undergrazed. It's just how it is. If it had been a level fell of similar vegetation all over, then you could have stocked it at a number which, you know, created the right sort of grazing. But our fell's not like that.
John, I was only trying to explain that those thistles are likely to be the biennial ones. And so they will need a new crop of young plants every year to keep going. In your spare time, if you like to go along and grub out this year's basil plants and stop them flowering.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, I don't know whether there's any other selective thistle killer that you could use.
Yeah, well, over our fell, we were probably talking about, if I had to guess at the area covered by these thistles in total, it might have been 100 acres, 200 acres, something like that. So I won't be going up there with a thistle chopper anytime soon.
I've just had a thought, John, and that is that if you could chop down the thistles when they've grown, say they've got half their height, and before they're flowering, when they're just beginning to flower, if you could mow them at that stage and intervene 1 year so that hopefully there weren't so many plants the following year.
Yeah.
You get the idea.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Anybody? Well, John, thank you very much indeed. You obviously have raised a lot of interest, judging from the number of questions you've got. That's usually a good indication. And I'm very pleased you've come along. You've made the effort come along to represent the farmers and given us an insight into what life's like for you. It's been difficult to have a show of hands clapping when it's on. Good, there you are. Thank you very much indeed, John. I hope you've enjoyed the evening.
Yes, no, I have enjoyed it, and we'll do it again in 20 years' time.
Oh, no, before then.
Well, I don't know whether, I doubt if I'll be here, but maybe.
Never say
maybe
never.
you will, John.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure you'll be there.
I'm not too sure. Right, thank you very much. Well, next
Good night.
week.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Before you say good night, hang on. Before you say good night, next week we've got Lombardo who will be talking about the landowner's perspective. And I noticed that he was tuned into us this evening.
Yeah.
I think he's been trying to get into as many of the evenings as possible, which is really very good. And then after that, we've got Richard Betton, and he's going to talk about the agricultural transition plan, the change from common market to the UK agricultural policy. As far as the upland is concerned, I think we would all like to see how this is going to roll out, because I believe the DEFRA is being very slow at getting out information into the farming community as to what it'll be like for the uplands. Anyway, we can look forward next week to Lombardo and the week after to Richard Betton. Any questions? No. Shall we say good night now? Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.